Now, make sure you keep time, okay? Are you up? You're gonna be up all night. Now,
Hey, Sister Virgila.
good evening. How are you, Sister Angela?
I'm good, and you?
I'm good. A little tired. It's been a long day, but I'm good though. I can't really complain. All right, so good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Good evening.
Um, we're in the Ruth chapter 1, and um, let's go ahead and open up in prayer, and then we could get into the scriptures. Um, let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for this day. God, thank you, God, for all that you have done on behalf of your people. God, we are truly grateful for life, for health, for strength, for healing, for provision, God, for protection, all the things that you provide for us, God. We are grateful, God. We ask you to, Lord, just guide this Bible study, Lord. Guide our hearts and our minds and our words, Lord, that all that we discuss tonight, Lord, would be uplifting to your name, God, would be glorifying to you, God, that we might learn and grow, God, and change as a result of your word this evening. And we just thank you and honor you for it right now. We give you all praise and we give you all thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Ruth chapter 1. Um, it's not terribly long, only 22 verses, but very impactful account in the scriptures. So, um, is there anyone who would like to start reading? Or I can start and somebody can just um, join in where I leave off. So, why don't I do that? Why don't I start? I'm reading the New Living Translation, and then I don't know where I'll stop, but then somebody else can read if they so choose. So, read chapter 1, starting at verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a man from Bethlehem in Judah left the country because of a severe famine. He took his wife and 2 sons and went to live in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi. Their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. During their stay in Moab, Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah, and the other a woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone without her husband or sons. Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters in law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. When her two daughters in law, with her two daughters in law, she set out from the place where she had been living, and they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her two daughters in law, "Go back to your mother's homes instead of coming with me. And may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. I read through verse 9. Does somebody else care to read, beginning at verse 10?
There you go. Tiffany, pick up.
Okay.
But they started crying and said to her, "No, we will go with you to your people." "You must go back," my daughters, Naomi answered. "Why do you want to come with me? Do you think I could have sons again for you to marry? Go back home, for I am too old to get married again. Even if I thought there was still hope, and so got married tonight and had sons, would you wait until they had grown up? Would this keep you from marrying someone else? No, my daughters, you know that's impossible. The Lord has turned against me, and I feel very sorry for you." Again, they started crying. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye and went back home. But Ruth held on to her. So Naomi said to her, "Ruth, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her God. Go back home with her." But Ruth answered, "Don't ask me to leave you. Let me go with you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and that is where I will be buried. May the Lord's worst punishment come upon me if I let anything but death separate me from you." Anybody else?
Okay. All right, that was through 17. Anyone else want to read starting at 18?
When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. They went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived, the whole town became excited, and the women there exclaimed, "Is this really Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she answered. "Call me Mara, because Almighty God has made my life bitter. When I left here, I had plenty, but the Lord has brought me back without a thing. Why call me Naomi when the Lord Almighty has condemned me and sent me trouble?" This then was how Naomi came back from Moab with Ruth, her Moabite daughter-in-law. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the barley harvest was just beginning.
Yeah. Thank
Mhm.
you. So the first verse, it mentions the first thing mentioned in the first verse says in the days when the judges ruled in Israel. And, aside from setting up a timeline, I like when I read that and without any, let's say we have no like prior knowledge or anything, besides just trying to set up a timeline, there has to be a reason why, the fact that judges ruling at this time is mentioned in this first verse. Um, and I think, of course, the book prior to Ruth is Judges. And so these books are connected. And so, um, there's the fact that there's a timeline set up with that mention. There's a connection to the, prior book and what was going on in the prior book when the judges were ruling. And so going back and maybe, doing some research or doing some reading about, what was going on in the leadership when the judges were ruling during this time might be um, something to add to the story. I do think so. And as I was attempting to do that, I was like, oh, but does that take the focus off of the rest of the story that um, is also so very interesting? So it was hard for me to kind of um, put that in maybe some brief, words when I started like traipsing back through Judges, except to say that in a couple of the commentaries I read, it mentioned that there was some like instability in Israel during that time, but I don't think that I think there's a reason for it, and one of the other Bible scholars on may have something to say about that or add about that, but what struck me, I guess, most in that first verse was the fact that there was a famine. So, yes, the judges were ruling during this time, but what and I'm sure that people who were going through it would probably say, oh, the most important thing here is the fact that, people are going through a famine. And that famine is one of the things that caused some of the events of this, story to start beginning to unfold. It caused some movement. It caused some people to make some choices and make some decisions. It caused people to do some things differently and to consider something they might not have considered before. And that's really what became really relatable to me, that sometimes, here it's a famine, but when hard times hit, when something that is so, severe like a famine may, enter your life, some huge change, something that's catastrophic that you didn't even see coming. Sometimes when that happens, some decisions need to be made, changes need to be made, some reaction or some action needs to be taken to deal with this set of circumstances that wasn't there before. So in this story, it talks about this Elimelech and his family moving from Bethlehem to um, Moab because of this famine. So they had this set of circumstances presented themselves, and this head of the family said, "I have to, make some decisions. My family is not going to stay here and starve, so we're going to go and we're going to make this move." And it was, a foreign country. It was a different land. It was something new. And we'll talk about throughout this story what happened when they got there. But that initial decision that needed to be made, that is put in the hands of this man who was leading his family, I found that to be really interesting as well. Like it starts out with this man making this decision for his family. And then as we go on, you know, that story changes as well. Those circumstances change as well. He, so, um, and that to me is sort of uh, a commentary on life and how life is, that sometimes you start out one way, you start out, with one sort of circumstances, you start out thinking things are supposed to go one way, and then something changes and changes quickly. Decisions need to be made, and then, something else changes and something else happens, and causes you to maybe go down a path that you didn't see coming. But, all the while trusting that God is leading and God has a plan, I think is ultimately the, an important thing for us all to remember. But anyway, that is where I'm starting. I want to start, or that's where I started anyway. And so as you know, I would like to hear if anyone else had any initial thoughts about where this story began, or even leading up to this. Please, now would be the time to share.
I'm sorry, but I missed something. I heard you saying something. I'm sorry about that. About the decision made by Elimelech about
Mm-hmm.
moving his family, and if you could sort of help me to remember or bring me back up to speed briefly on what you shared about that, because I was looking at that a little bit earlier.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that, you know, this famine had come, and so something catastrophic caused there to be a decision that needed to be made. And the decision at that time was in the hands of this man who was leading his family. So he took his wife and he took his sons and moved them from Bethlehem, from their country, to Moab, you know, a different land, you know, and clearly different traditions. And you know, they had to make it. He made the decision for the family. And I was saying later on, or as we go through the story, we'll find out how many other kind of things happen as a result of how this story began and the move that um, he made with his family to begin with. So you had some comments on that.
Well, I guess first of all, good evening, everyone. Um, Back in the book of Ruth, I think it's been years. It seems like since we've been here, and
Maybe.
um, as I opened it back up again this evening, yeah, it was probably more questions now than ever. And I think that's probably one of the first questions that I looked at. And in addition to what you were talking about, as far as in the days when the judges ruled and what that ultimately meant, and why it began there and how we got there. But as to Elimelech moving his family um, to a country who served other gods was one that has been examined and criticized, because a man of God leaving essentially the promised land to go to a land ruled by a sort of a tyrant king and the worship of this god Shamash, um, was not viewed as a very wise decision, and it caused some very difficult situations for himself and his family. So I think that probably more so for me was a relevant part of the lesson as to number one, typically during those times when a famine arose, if you read the stories in Deuteronomy mainly and the other books before, it was because the people had sort of gone astray, and it was God's sort of judgment to remind the people of their errors and to hopefully bring them back into their alignment with his word. And so it seemed almost as if this man was sort of trying to evade I would say, the wrath of God, to seek shelter and in a different place. And I think that's sort of kind of how I view him after sort of getting a little bit more insight into why this move, because it looks on the outside, it looks sort of like a wise idea to move like that. Here he is moving to a place where the land is fertile, and it's like it seems to have everything that we need to move there. So it will make sense for us to leave this land here to go there, because I could take care of my family there. but what's the motivation, and is it a good idea in light of your relationship to God? And I think this is a lesson that we'll see sort of impact the entirety of the story. So that's kind of how I looked at him. And now that I have a little bit more insight as to um, where and why this move was made.
Amen. Any other initial comments?
Yes, I see. Val put something in the chat. Thank you for joining us, Val. And you're at work, so you can't come off. But I'll just read hers, and then I'll make a comment on my insights. It says, after reading, I wondered why the book of Ruth began with loss instead of triumph. 1 through 5 was loss upon loss. The tragedy strikes, and Elimelech dies. Naomi's sons marry Moabite women, Ruth and Oprah. And 10 years later, both her sons die. It is depressing. And that's where I was. Thank you for that, Val, for putting that in there. I was in the same area. And Keith, thank you so much for talking about the uh, man leaving the promised land, and to be able to take care of his family. And it would make sense uh, to be able to leave from famine, as you pointed out, Virgila. That word strikes us. What do you do when famine comes? And I love how you open up with that. Um, as she said, verse 3, it dies, and there's death. And as Val said, it continues all the way into chapter 5. Um, I'm just thinking about, how do you deal with death, life after somebody as important as this head of household, this husband and father, this leader, he dies. What do you do now? And how do you live in a new way? And then on top of that, uh, 10 years later, her sons die. And just think about the trauma, think about the pain, think about all the mourning that's going on through her, which makes this other point that every time I go to this book, I always want to call it Naomi, because it's filled with Naomi more so than Ruth. But it turns to Ruth later on, but Naomi is a key figure throughout the whole book. And so it makes you wonder, why is it called Ruth? Why is it called Ruth? So that, just those things that I mentioned there, um, and then what's striking too throughout the book and in this chapter is the word go. Just go. And then it opens up even more to go back, and then go with, and then go and God. Um, so this importance of going, of pushing forward, of traveling, it stands out to me. And then the importance of a name. When we see the names are lifted up, and then Naomi even wants to change her name, or changes her name, right? They say, can this be her? And she says, don't even call me that. Call me this. And to be able to name her situation. So just the naming uh, highlights sometimes the situation and the pain and the struggle. And lastly, talking about name, um, we see that this book is right after Judges, as you pointed out earlier, Ursula, and right before Samuel and Kings, which is on purpose. Some theologians say that this was put in place to um, defend the kingship of David, right? Because we end with the names, the genealogy of David, and David being the great grandson of Ruth. Um, so we see these names, we see the importance of it, we see the connection, and then also why it's not called Naomi, but it's called Ruth, because of the connection to David. Um, so yeah, these things and many are jumping out at me, and thank you for letting me share, and I look forward to getting into this text even more.
Any other initial comments?
Well, sort of I guess to piggyback on some of the things that Pastor was saying real quickly here. Um, just one of the things, and really, I think you began this by talking about verse 1, in the days when the judges ruled in Israel. And Pastor B connected the book of Judges. And one thing quickly here, the last verse in the book of Judges, chapter 21, says, oh, in those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their eyes. We've got some problems here. We got a land now that's in chaos, and the people are doing what they decided they wanted to do. And I think to Vel's point, there is tragedy on the horizon because decisions are being made now. And the decision that this man makes impacts his whole family. And sometimes we see that even today where somebody is moving their family because money and opportunity calls them. And they're being pulled away from where they're supposed to be because it looks pretty good over here. And you get yourselves and your family sometimes in trouble. And people are harmed because the man or whomever is leading this thing actually leads other people into danger. But God still has a way of restoring those back to where he had called them to be from the first place. Um, he has his people now in almost like a Sodom and Gomorrah type of environment, not in the same way, but in a land full of, well, the Moabites. And if anyone knows in the story about how that began, how this people even began, that name itself points back to a time where there was incestuous relationships that created a people whom lived and served other gods that were contrary to the God of Israel. So now you have a man abandoning his home to go and live amongst these people. And I think sometimes there are consequences for that if we go for the wrong reasons. And sometimes people are harmed by our consequences. And I think that there's something to be seen and learned from this. That when we are ultimately faced or sometimes faced with these choices, that we need to look more into them than just the surface level. Because sometimes those choices are packaged in a way that draw us into trouble without us realizing it. Everything that looks good isn't always good. And I think had Elimelech been in prayer and touch, it's fascinating because his name alone means my God is king. And if he had been so inclined to be in communion with this God and asked, should we take this opportunity to escape the famine and to go to a different land, maybe he would have made a different choice, and these tragedies might have not befallen his people. But I think as we see the story unfolds, it's like lading for me at least, with lessons after lessons that I think we could all find our lessons for each of us in different components or different aspects of the story. And I'm kind of curious to hear what yours are, because really for me, only one thing kind of really, really stood out. And hopefully we'll get to that before we finish tonight.
All right. Any other initial comments? So I did want to comment on something you just said, just reminded me of the fact that, yeah, they're, I think the family at least was operating in order when they followed the leading of Elimelech. His wife and his sons, he made a decision to move, and the family followed, as they should. I think too many times these days, people are more like, you go your way, I'm gonna go my way, and instead of following. And even with all that you brought up about, where they went and how they left, the promised land to go into this other land, and how, yes, God has a way of, working everything out, for his good. I also think that the fact that his family followed him, and stayed with him despite where they went, um, especially, his sons were able to, find wives. They got married. Um, and, his wife, uh, Naomi, I believe that, she was able to, survive this famine, be there with her sons as, they got married and found these wives. She was able to connect with them and then return to the land when the famine was over. She was able to survive all of this and be very instrumental in God's plan, I think, because she, um, followed when she was supposed to follow. And then when it came time for her to lead, in a sense, um, she took that on as well. So um, I think I'm saying that the way I want to. In any event, and any other thoughts? It's it's just really interesting to me. So yeah, very early on, like, Bell said and other people said, Elimelech, he dies, and so he leads the family into this, um, the land of Moab, who, like you were saying, serve other gods. And now, the he dies. And so what struck me about Naomi too, and when I said that she she listened to, um, her husband, and then back down in verse 6, it says, Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah. When she got ready to return, it had been some time, some time had passed, but now it sounds like, she's following the leading of the Lord. She hears God is doing something, and it is time for her to return. And so um, I see her as, like Pastor Thick was saying, is very instrumental in this whole, plan. She, followed Elimelech there with the family, and then heard from God that it was time to return, and made plans to do so. Um,
Well, for me, the irony of that is this. This man takes his wife and his two sons to escape death and a famine, only to lead his family into another country where his sons die. And then they find out that, hey, the famine is over back home where we just left. You need to go back. So you actually escaped the place that you thought was going to kill you, and you actually went to a place where it actually did get people killed, where people did die. Let me say that, where people did die, and then Naomi hears, like, hold up, I heard that the Lord blessed them. Let's go back to where we just came from. That's the irony of it, is you escaped the famine, or you thought you were escaping the famine. You ran from one disaster to another one.
Mm.
Yeah, sometimes God has you going through something for a reason. Somebody named Jonah tried to pull a fast one in that regards. If sometimes you're going through some things for a reason, he tells you to go through some things, or he allows you to go through some things for a reason. And it might be hard, but it might be to your benefit to remain, instead of trying to just run, especially run into an enemy camp, so to speak, and expecting things to turn out well for you over there. Yeah. That's the irony of it, I see, is that verse 6, Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. Interesting. Yeah. But our sons are dead now.
Mm.
Yeah,
Interesting.
what else? Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, you can hear upon the possible statement that who lifted that up? Um, Martha and Mary. If you had been here, Lord, right? But in a different phrase, if we had not gone, right? If we didn't go there, and probably Naomi's lifting this up, that if we had not gone there, would my husband still be alive? Would my son still be living? Right? Um, and those different questions are going through her mind as she's mourning, as she's struggling, and been there for 10 years, because she could have left, right, after he died, but stayed there. So just thinking about that's tough. That's tough, um, to be there, to leave all these different questions in your mind. But as you lift it up, Ursula, that um, her faith um, kind of shined out here. She said about she heard that God was doing something somewhere else. So she had her ear. She still was looking and still was hoping that God, you got to change something. It can't be like this, right?
Yeah, and the fact that she still, even, despite where they had moved to, she was still holding on to the God that she knew, the true and the living God. Her circumstances had changed and people in her life had changed, but for her, God hadn't changed. I had written down, I think in my notes, like, sometimes your location changes and seasons change and people change and your mind sometimes changes, but God doesn't change. And as long as we continue to hold on to him, he should be the stabilizing force in our lives, no matter what other thing comes our way. We can count on him. We can trust in God to be the same, you know, yesterday, today, and forevermore. We're the ones that have all the ups and downs and ins and outs, and but yeah, that I believe Naomi does command like super respect, at least from me, for you know the actions that she took, the decisions that she took to, go when it was time to go, to return when it was time to return, to hear from God and to stay with God, to keep her faith in him, despite what she was probably just surrounded by in this new land. And even people now have joined her family and she's still staying with God. And
Well, I think that's where I get this sense that this is how we possibly got ourselves in trouble in this text and in our lives in the first place is that from Elimelech's perspective is that when things get difficult, we leave God and seek safety elsewhere and seek provisions elsewhere and seek protection elsewhere and find disaster sometimes on the other side of that. And it seems like that's what, for me, is sort of encapsulated in this opening scene here in the first book of Ruth is that when the famine comes, he decides to leave the promised land. He desires this the land, the place where God had promised his people. And times get tough, and now I'm going to leave to go for greener pastures. And there aren't greener pastures, even though they might look greener. And disaster is found over there. Because when you leave God, that it might look good, but you'll be looking like Naomi and saying, hold up, when you look back and see he's still blessing his people over there, let me go back to him. He's gracious enough to receive us. But sometimes you step out there and you find yourself in verse 3, where my version says, then Elimelech died. So I think for me, the lesson in that is, yeah, a famine may come, but don't leave the promised land. Don't leave God's provisions. He still provides for his people. Even he don't even know what would have happened if he would have stayed with his family.
But when you're in survival mode,
exactly. Who do you trust?
Right.
What do you
when
trust?
When you're in survival mode, sometimes that's when it's so hard to like stay the course. Sometimes like this, wait a second, this is rough. We need to make some moves, make some decisions. We need to do something because otherwise, when we start looking at ourselves and each other for survival, then yeah, we make those kinds of decisions instead of saying, God, you're responsible for for me. You're the provider here, not me. And when we start taking on you know what's supposed to be God's responsibilities ourselves, yeah, that's when we end up in places that we don't need to be.
And that's why I said at the beginning of this, I can understand and appreciate the decision that was made and why it was made, because that is sort of the natural decision that we gravitate towards when these sort of things are put in front of us, as opposed to going to God and trusting him and asking for his guidance. Like I would imagine, and I truly believe that he would not tell you to leave the land where he told you to go to unless he tells you that.
Okay.
But
I have a great question. So, do you think that it was right for Naomi to say, okay, I'll go, if, Elimelech decides this is what we're going to do? And do you think that she should have gone?
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I'm
I mean,
just
that's not
asking.
even really, yeah, I thought it was, yeah.
This, because sometimes, like I was saying earlier, sometimes, these days it's like, oh, you're going that way. Okay, I don't want to go that way. Or I've decided I need to, do something else. And it's so easy to just, let's just go our separate ways. You do you, I'm gonna do me. And no, I agree. Like, I think she should have followed and should have gone with him. The family should have stayed, together. But yeah, there are going to be consequences for decisions, and when you are the ultimate decision maker, then you're going to have to like bear some of those consequences. This comes with the territory. So,
And to answer your question, I agree too that she should have went, mainly because just the context. Back then, the man was the main provider. The man was doing everything. So you didn't see often a woman just by herself handling everything. Now, the Bible does talk about that in different books, but and even in here, where she had to manage on her own. Uh, but there's another question that I was thinking about. Um, where do we hear a lot about Naomi and about Ruth and all the other ones, but where where is Abimelech's faith? Or I'll call him Big E. Big E. Where's Big E's faith at? Uh, how does his faith show up? Um, because yeah, at first it's tough, to see his decision to leave that land and to trust God, just to stay there and trust God. Because when you find out later on, there's people there that stay there. So
Hmm.
why did he leave? And that must meant that he had some type of provision and means to say, I'm going here to leave and I can make it happen. Uh, but where do we see his faith in the midst of this? Because he just doesn't die and that's it. And nothing's left without his name or anything. Um, we see his work, and I never really thought about it before because inside this book is mainly about women, but and the strength of women. You see that showing, uh, and overall, it's about God uh, and His love and care and support, and making ways out of no ways. But here where is Big E's faith at? And uh, I think it surfaces in his sons of staying and being committed, being there and still trying to make it work. And then I also see it inside Naomi. And let me make it clear a little bit more. For her to say and to hold on to her faith um, doesn't it means that he hasn't abandoned his faith all the way. That somehow he was encouraging her, teaching the family, doing things. And maybe I'm just stretching out on a limb here, but there's something for her to go through so much that she went through and still hold on to God when there's a lot of times some pain that we went through and then we might turn a cold shoulder to God. We might say I don't want to pray. I don't want to go here, but somehow she's still holding on. Uh, and perhaps that's because of something of his faith um, and him, or maybe his last words to her, saying, "Hold on to God," or who knows. But uh, just got me thinking about where does his faith show up? Um, because I'm a firm believer that in any relationship, um, not just iron sharpens iron, but one encourages the other, and we grow in our faith because of the other. So there were some things that he instilled in her, and some things that she instilled in him, and he wouldn't have gone just by himself if he didn't get some type of a nod or like, yeah, let's go from Naomi as well. So I'll just leave that there.
So I do wonder though, that makes me think about the fact that um his sons, I don't know how old they were when they left, but at some point they were of age to get married, of age to take on the responsibility of leading their own families. And so they decided to marry these Moabite women instead of saying, "Hey, it's time for me to marry. I'm gonna go back and marry, somebody from um, Bethlehem, Judah. I'm going back. That's where the foundation is. And so the fact that, and I wonder too about, and not a whole lot is said about them, but like either they knew something that or their mama knew something, or the fact that they got married to these Moabite women, knowing that they believe something very different from them, I'm assuming, unless they didn't really have the faith of their parents. But they got married, and it was God who had to work things out, God who had to change Ruth's heart, I believe. So there's that. But that's, I don't really have any like evidence of it for or against, but it just makes me wonder about where the sons were in terms of their faith, um, at by marrying um, these Moabite women. And of course, that is Keith just motioned to the screen that is still open to that last verse in Judges that talks about all the people doing whatever seemed right in their own eyes during that time. And so, I guess that's a part of the decision that they made, or the
Well, there was a command or commandments in the old books about marrying those that were outside of your,
tribe.
yeah, and in faith.
Mm-hmm.
So the people were doing what was right in their own eyes, and the people are still doing what's right in their own eyes, because there's still laws and commands that we have been given that we choose to like and not like. And however old they were, they decided to marry these Moabite women for whatever reasons. But obviously, they never made it back to the promised land, because they died in seemingly Moab as well. So to answer your question, at least in part, as Judges 21 says, um, in those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes, and sometimes that costs us.
Oh, wait. So I just read something that verse 10, now has given me some evidence, I think. Verse 10, when as so after the sons die, and Naomi has her daughters-in-law. So, I'm sure they must have bonded, because they're willing to actually go with her and return with her. And verse 10 in this version says, when she tells them, goodbye, she's leaving, and basically, go back to your parents' home, and I hope God blesses you with another husband. And verse 10 says, no, they say, we want to go with you to your people. And the only your people that they knew was well, I'm assuming was Naomi and the sons. Like, they knew their husbands, and they were then saying no. So evidently there was something in the husbands, there were in those two sons that married them, and in Naomi, they must have gotten something from them in those relationships that would cause them to want to go back with them, to their homeland, and leave Moab. Does that make sense? So, because why? Because if the husbands were all about, you know, if they weren't any different than anybody else, then why would they want to go back with them?
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, we'll touch on that here in a second.
Well, go ahead and touch on it.
No, I mean, I want to give you for something. Yeah.
Okay, so because I'm gonna go on.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so and of course, Naomi is trying to get them to stay. Once all the men are gone, and she's now heard that she's gonna go back to um, go back home, because now she knows that the famine there is over. She's trying to convince her daughters-in-law to go back to their parents, but they say they want to go with her. And So Orpah, of course, finally decides to stay in Moab, but Ruth is the one that says no, and she has evidently bonded with Naomi to the point that she's like clinging to her and saying, "No, I'm not. And those what she says, um, out of the whole book of Ruth, this is usually the scripture that I hear, and every time I hear it, it sounds like just beautiful, and it is it epitomizes, I think, the how we should be when it comes to our devotion to God, like in our fellowship, in our discipleship. It um and and she basically tells her, um down in verse 16, after all of the weeping and decision making and all of that this version says, "I will go wherever you go and live wherever you live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. I will die where you die and will be buried there." Um, and so that devotion that she has to, Naomi, to the point that she's clearly been influenced by Naomi, and even and hopefully her husband as well, influenced to the point that she's willing to serve, the God that Naomi serves, and leave, what she grew up believing. And that also is sort of in the epitome of what we should be as ambassadors for Christ in this world, that people are so influenced by our devotion to God and our sharing through testimony and our actions, this um devotion to our king, our savior, that they want to join us in serving him as well. Nothing yet.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And that's the second piece of what you started off with, saying your people. There's something in your people. Um, and then later on, you hear her famous quote. Um, and yeah, I love that. And anytime I come to Ruth, I always think about that as well. Um, if we go back to verse 11 and what Naomi said, um, in the beginning of this scene that we could see inside the road. I think there's some pictures out there that you can see one going, and them two clinging to each other. Um, it's like a fork in the road. It's a scene now of where she's at in her life, but also where she's at in her soul. She's conflicted. She's in pain. Verse 11, Naomi says, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me?" Listen to her confliction and her pain and her struggle. Why would you even come with me? I think she says something in here that makes me wrestle a little bit in my soul. Uh, am I going to have more sons? Not that piece, but who could become your husbands? Return home. Um, Here it is. My daughters, I am too old. That's one piece right there. I'm too old to have another husband. What makes it too old? And that's what I'm wrestling with. And then the second piece, even if I thought there was still hope for me, that's the second piece right there um, that she's wrestling with. And she said, "There's no hope. Uh, Even if I had a husband tonight, then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up?" Uh, so there's this connection to having a husband and being able to give birth to sons. That's important to her. But just her wrestling with um, that she's too old, number one, and number two, that she doesn't have any hope. Although she knows that there's something over back in home, where God is stirring and doing some things. She's trying to get rid of everybody, um, and just let her be. And Orpha says, "All right, I'm gone." Um, but you have Ruth that clung to her, um, and in some sense gives her that little bit of hope that she's holding on to. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that just to hear that wrestling that she has in her soul. Uh, and it's good that when we wrestle with certain things like that, to be able to wrestle with somebody that we can share our concerns with, share our struggles with, um, and won't criticize us, but just listen, um, and help me in my struggle. Right. This is where she's at. She's struggling. I don't have no hope. I what is there for me? Even I'm too old, and just she can go on and on about the list that she has. Uh, but Ruth listened to her. Ruth was there for her. Didn't criticize her and say, "You don't talk like that. No, you don't do that." But she listened to her and gave her some support that she needed in that moment. And I thank God for the support of being able to trust in friends and loved ones, and those that are just able to listen and hear my struggle. Because it took a lot for her to say that, to say all this pain and struggle that she's dealing with right now.
Yeah, imagine this. I mean, I look at her and marvel at her strength and faith, because it's sort of easy to read, but to recognize the fact that she's moved to a foreign land and has lost her husband and her sons, that would put pretty much anyone into this mode of distress and despair, to where you would be saying such things. So she asked some very fascinating questions like, look at me, why would you go with me? I think that's a very good question. Like, I don't have anything. Why would you come with me? Now, that's the question that, if you just leave it there, looking at and then she goes on to give you some harsh realities of what her life looks like to her. Yeah, why would I go with you? That doesn't look very appealing to anybody, even to you as you share it with me. I definitely don't want to go with you. So I think that's a very important question that she asked. And why would you come with me? I can't, I'm not going to get married again, more than likely. I'm not going to have any more sons. And if I do have any sons, they're going to be 4 years old. You're going to be 40. So, I mean, what good is that going to do? So, yeah, why should you come with me? She exemplifies some incredible faith, but she also is wise in that Naomi knows that back home in her own country, she has rights there as a widow. Those rights kick in when you're a citizen of her home country. She said, I'm going back to my homeland. In fact, verse 8, go back to your mother and the Lord, you kindness to me, the Lord bless you. And verse 10, Virgil said, no, they said, we want to go with you to your people. What people? Back to her homeland, which is what she talked about in verse 6. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. She's going to go back home to her homeland and to her people. So I honestly believe that what you said is absolutely true about the fact that she is displaying a faith that appeals to Ruth. And I think that's where the important aspect of all of this for me is found, in the verse that we also love so much, and what Ruth says in verse 16. But before she said that, I think it was Naomi said something about um, where am I?
15.
13, I think.
Or what she said, your sister-in-law has gone back
No, actually, it
to
was
her gods.
at first, before I was going to say that, I'm sorry. 15, Naomi said to her, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. She's going back to her people and her gods. You should do the same. Ruth says, and that's why this is so important to me. Here's your choice now. You can go back to your people and your gods, or follow me, and I'm going back to my God and my people. And Ruth's response is absolutely incredible. And it's an incredible example of faith. And I think Naomi's life had to reveal something to her for her actually to be attracted to that, because she has a very good question that should be responded to by most of us. Like, you're right, I'm not following this. You got nothing. Why should you follow me? Why would you come back with me? And she says, wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. What she's ultimately saying is, I am renouncing my citizenship here and becoming a citizen over there where your people will become my people, and your God will become my God. And that's what Christ says to us when he says to lay down your cross, pick up your cross, and follow me. Like, my God will be your God, my people will be your people. And that's exactly what she's saying to her there. So the response is beautiful, but what she's ultimately saying is, I'm cutting ties with all of the people of Moab. I'm no longer a citizen. Your people are going to be my people. And wherever you go, that's where I'm going at. And that's the choice that is ultimately laid out for all of us when we decide if God's people is going to be our people, or the Moabites and the people of the world are going to be our people. Right. So her response, is beautiful as it is much more significant, because she's ultimately saying, wherever you are a citizen of, that's where I'm going to be a citizen of. Whoever your God is, whoever your king is, that's who's going to be my God, and that's who's going to be my king. And that's because of this, what you were saying, this example, this sort of what we're supposed to be when people see our faith and they choose a new God as opposed to the gods that her sister-in-law decided to go back to.
Right. And this is when, before she knows anything about a Boaz or any of the other benefits, she has just seen, this example in Naomi and, maybe her husband too. But, she, like you said, is now, she's no longer claiming citizenship in Moab. She's going back to be, to take citizenship elsewhere, with the true and the living God, without, just choose. It's like just choosing God, and not, not because she's getting a new husband, not because of any land, not because of, any money or anything, but she is choosing the faith and the journey that she sees and is following, with, like, she's a disciple of Naomi, basically, at this point, following her lead. So yeah, it is a beautiful thing.
It's amazing what shows up and what people really pay attention to when trials come, and how they see your faith in that moment. that will preach more stronger than when things are going well. So, case in point, she, when Naomi started speaking, as you pointed out, and in her pain, even at the end of 13, she says, "My daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." Some people might say, well, she gave up on God. But no, she's speaking in her faith in that moment through her pain that I'm still holding on to God, but it seems like this God has turned against me, but I'm still trusting him. And in that moment, um, you can even see the next verse. At this, they wept aloud again. They they felt her pain. They felt her struggle. Uh, and then we see one leave, and then um, Naomi comes back and says, "Look," said Naomi, and as you pointed out, go back, uh, going back to her people and her gods, go back with her. And so she gives her that ultimatum, as you pointed out, Keith, and I love that either go back with your gods or come with me and my God. And in her speaking, in her stance, even in her weakness, Ruth sees this type of faith um, that was perhaps displayed um, in Ruth's father-in-law, and if she saw him before he passed away, but also in the sons. But she sees this faith inside Naomi, something that makes her say, "You know what? I'm going to go with you. I'm going this way. I'm not going to go the other way. I'm going this way." And it's amazing what people can see in us when we're going through.
Yeah, and people, not only did Naomi see it in her, according to verse um 19, it says when they got back, the entire town, it says, my version says, was stirred by their arrival, or this version over here says that the people were excited by their arrival. So, you know, she's been away for some time, but the whole town was excited when she got back. That, like, to me, that is more evidence of who she was, and even a legacy that, I mean, I'm sure that it has something to do with, her husband and their place in the town and all of that too. But the fact that, she comes back and the whole town gets excited really speaks to who she was as well. And they're excited. They see, this her as being clearly somebody like positive, and that is this really Naomi, the woman asked, it says. And then what also is one of the things that really just like touched my heart in reading this, when she says, "Don't call me Naomi," she told them, "Instead call me Mara, for the Almighty has made life very bitter for me." And this whole, "And I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty." And it's, to me, I'm just thinking, when I read that, like, I she renamed herself. Like, in some parts, in some scriptures, God gives people a new name, and God will, give people a whole new identity. But she's trying to give herself one here, from what I'm reading. And then, because of all the stuff that she has been through, understandable. But when she says, "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty," and I'm thinking, you went away. Were you full though? Like, there was a famine at the time and you were struggling when you left. And now, I know she's coming back out without her husband. So I'm sure there's an emptiness because of the fact that he has been gone. But to say that she's empty when she has Ruth like clinging to her, and not only does she have Ruth clinging to her and coming back with her, she clearly has at least some level of hope because of the fact that she heard that, you know, in verse 6, where it says Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So she wasn't completely empty, maybe still in mourning, but she still has some hope. And she has somebody actually who she's discipled someone and brought somebody back with her. And so I think that God, like I just don't think that she may still be um mourning and still be a little depressed, and her maybe her view of herself might, her countenance might be down, but what other people see as her testimony, they're excited that she's back. She's coming back with someone who is like now converted, who believes because of her. And also, she's still hearing from God. She heard God is blessing his people, and she's willing to go, you know and to come back to where she knows the presence of God is. So, I think God sees more in her, and that is a usual thing. God sees more in us sometimes than we see in ourselves. um and that's what it looks like to me here.
Yeah, just to touch on that God sees more. Um, it's so important. God sees our plans. God sees our beginning and our end. He knows and has the plans for us, the ultimate plans. So God does see more. And even when we may use the phrase, um, God has afflicted me, that God has, the Almighty has brought misfortune upon me, the NIV version, verse 21. Uh, there may be times where we may have said that before, uh, or felt that before, or even seen that on somebody else. But God has the ultimate plan. And those moments that we perhaps have been through of affliction or God not being there, uh, we can witness that years later, months later, weeks later, that God has always been there. And God was there even in that moment that I felt like He left me. I felt like He abandoned me, felt like I was afflicted, that uh, God has brought misfortune upon me. Uh, Even in that moment, years later, still living through it, we can look back and say, God, I thank you for being with me in that moment so that the next time when I go through some things, I know that you haven't abandoned me. You never leave me nor forsaken me. That's what you say. So, um, yeah, just thinking about this, that for her to be able to say that and still say that God is the reason for this, um, but knowing the end of this book, that she's able to say something different near the end. And I believe we can say something different too.
Yeah, I think what earlier on, I know Vel had written something about how depressing all this is, and true. And I think maybe some of us can, even think back to a time, or even maybe there's a time now when, life and things that happen can really have that effect on us. Like things can really be, depressing at times. And it just seems like, wow, this is just like pulling me down and into this place of despair that it sounds like, Naomi is in. But even while she's going through, she's still living out her faith, and somebody else is watching her clearly. She has Ruth here willing to change her whole life, because you're not gonna just like decide to connect to someone and follow someone who isn't about anything. So clearly Naomi has, gone through a lot, losing, her husband, her sons, and, even being out of her country, and, and who knows what else. But clearly Ruth is willing to, attach herself to her because she has been some type of example to her. Someone else is watching, and I think there are these people who want to be disciples, who want to learn from those of us who have some experience with God and are living out our faith. And and we need to be able to, continue on that walk, because there are people kind of dependent on us to be who we were called to be, so that, they can find their place also. And so that, like, and as we, and if we continue in the story, beyond chapter 1, we can all see, and we probably, most of us may know how the whole story unfolds. But if we are who God called us to be, then, and no matter how difficult things get and how depressing things can get, because they can in this life, in this world, things can. But if we stay the course, somebody's life may be all the better because of it. If we get caught up in depression, and allowing things to kind of pull us off course and pull us down, and, and as hard as it may be sometimes, keeping our faith, just keeping our faith in God, no matter what the situation is. It is not just about us. God has this whole plan that we can't see. And if we stay the course, then, we can, I think, be a blessing and a benefit to somebody else. And we don't know who that person is. We don't know if it's a Ruth who needs to marry somebody to, have this child, to cause something to happen way down the line, like her connection to, David and then Jesus. But, there's God's plan is going to unfold, and we just need to be in the place that He has, called us to be, so that, those things can kind of, fit together, and all things can work together, for the good of those who love God and the called according to His purpose. So yeah.
But it's, I think for me, the beauty of the scriptures in that even in this account of Naomi and Ruth, that you see a woman of faith whose faith isn't always perfect, whose faith is challenged sometimes because life is challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And the scripture doesn't present someone as having this perfect faith, even through trials and tribulations, that we're sometimes dealt with difficulties that cause us to question things. So that's the beauty of the life of Naomi. But clearly, she represents a faith that is representative to the point to where someone is willing to depart from their old life to attach themselves to this person and to believe in the God that they believe in. You know, Pastor Three mentioned it earlier about all the trials and you all have and tribulations that she had experienced. And yet, through all of these difficulties, all the way back up to verse 8, she said to her daughter in law, "Go back to your mother's home, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me." Verse 9, may the Lord bless you with the security of an. She's still showing faith in this Lord that she serves. Even through all of this difficulty, she done lost her husband and her two sons, and she's still showing the faith in his love. She's still expressing the difficulties that she's experiencing, But she's still saying, I'm going home. And she's still telling them, like that very important question in verse 10. We want to, first of all, that statement in 10, we want to go back with you to your people. Well, do you really? Yeah, I know you want to go back if I got a lot of stuff back here and it looks real good over here, but here's the situation that I'm going to lay out before you. Do you really want to go back? I want to see who really want to go back. I got nothing here. I'm 1,000 years old. I'm not going to have any more kids. I don't know what I'm going back to. Do you really want to go with me? I just have a God back home to worship and not a roof to lay my head up under. Do you really, like Christ says, I have nowhere to, do you really want to follow me? Well, one of them said, nah, you're right. I don't want that deal. I'm going back. It might be a better deal over here. And she said, I'm going anyway. I mean, for you to still have faith in this Lord here, I'm with you because I don't got that kind of faith in nothing. So I'm going to go because of your faith and what you've demonstrated. You've lost everything and you still have faith in this God that you said has provided grain for his people. I'm in. In fact, I'm so in whether you die, I'll die there. I'm all in. And that's really the faith that is attributed to Naomi showing someone that to where they're impacted by her faith to where they say, I'm all in. Do I have that kind of faith? Am I demonstrating that kind of faith to where somebody looks at me and say, hey man, you all in, I'm all in? Because you can get some people to go all in on some foolishness. But can you get people to go all in because of the faith that you've demonstrated? Because you demonstrated a faith that not too many of us, when asked that question, why should you go with me, would have took that deal. I mean, that's not a real good deal that you just laid out for me, sir. That's not a real good deal that you just laid out for me. They're like a pretty good deal over there that they got. I think I'm gonna go with the other deal. And for Ruth to say, I'm gonna take the deal. That's a powerful move. I'm gonna denounce my whole citizenship. Your people are gonna be my people. Like, you see some people do that. Some people actually like, they leave everything to try to come here for a better life. They're like, I'm risking it all. I mean, I'm gonna risk my life to come there for a better life. And this ain't his kingdom. Just imagine what we should be doing to be a part of his kingdom, which is far greater than this one. That's a way better deal than this one. But we're still sort of appealing and attracted to this deal. And we should be like Ruth when Christ says this to us. And we should be saying those words that we're so enamored by. Like the beautiful words that she says. We should be saying those words to him. And because the deal is still on the table. Which deal you want to take?
All right. Well, it's about 8:27, 8:28. Anybody have any last thoughts or things that you want to share? The only thing I'll say, my last thing that I found so also awesome and beautiful and interesting about this book, like the book starts with famine and ends with harvest, and that right there is, a lot of times how things play out when we serve God. It seems like we've lost everything, and then next thing you know, here comes the harvest. And when we are on the losing end, sometimes it can seem really hard and really difficult to go through. But if we go through it with God, if we go through it in faith, then when the harvest comes, I think sometimes we don't even remember the famine, and so, and it just might, go be like that throughout life. Sometimes it seems like famine, sometimes it seems like harvest time, but I have been through those seasons myself, and I know when the harvest comes, it's just like, all the joy and everything that comes with it. I, hope that during that next season of famine that I can still have that same joy and walk through it, with that same faith and that same God, knowing that He's going to bring me out on the other side all right. Any other last thoughts before we close out?
Yeah, I just want to celebrate. Go ahead, brother. Sid.
No, I'm listening to you, Pastor Three.
Yeah, I just want to celebrate the support that's all around her, even when she tried to push people away. The support that came around Naomi, the daughters were there weeping with her. It means a lot when you can cry with somebody, and they cry with you, or just take your tears. Uh, and then um, when she got back to the hometown, and the community welcomed her, it stirred up the whole community. They welcomed her, even though she said what she said. Um, they knew her name. They knew who she was. Uh, and makes me think about uh, the old show, Cheers. Want to go to a place where everybody knows your name, your name. It makes a difference. And she trying to debunk that by saying, "Don't even call me that." But your name is your name, and so I'm celebrating the support that even when we try to push things away, people will still embrace you. And at the end of the day, celebrating how God knows our name, and how He will continue to support us, and encourage us, and lift us up and be there for us. So, yeah.
All right. Anyone else? Last comments?
I guess when I was reading that verse 20 and 21, Naomi was pretty much denouncing herself. The pain that she had to be feeling. Um, when you're going through those kind of emotions, you don't know how to deal with it. You don't know how to take it all in. You got people leaning on you. You got your faith in God, and you got a lot looking at you, sitting right in front of you, laying on your heart, and you don't want the emphasis on you. So I can understand her kind of denouncing herself and putting her faith in, pronouncing her faith in God. Uh, when you're going through those kind of pains, the one thing you know for sure, um, when you have faith, is that faith. So get it off me. Understand. I know God has the answers. I know there's a plan here. I don't know it. I don't understand it all, but He does. He sees it. It's His plan. Um, Let me sort through these things, man. God are going to talk through this thing. I'm going to try to get some understanding from Him, some answers. And that's how I was feeling like what Naomi was going through when I read verse 20 and 21 and stuff. And her faith was showing very deep, very strong. She didn't want the emphasis uh, on her. She kept putting it back on God and stuff. So I really, really felt that in her going through those times. Because I remember when I lost my mom, and that's exactly how I felt during those times and stuff. I didn't want to hear what other people had to say about your mom would be so proud of you as a son. I didn't want to hear none of that. I just wanted to have that conversation with God and get some understanding. I'm hurt. Um, don't, don't put me in the limelight right now. I don't want none of that light shining. Um, that the light should be shining on God. So let's understand that. So that's how I felt about when I read verse 20 and 21. That's how it touched me. So just want to share that.
You know, it's fascinating because when I look at that verse, and she says, "Don't call me Naomi, instead call me Mara." Her name in Hebrew actually means like pleasant and joyful and sweet. That's what Naomi means in the Hebrew language. She said, "Don't call me that because that's not who I am anymore because of all that she had gone through." You know, I'm reminded of Jeremiah 29:11 when he says to Jeremiah that I know the plans that I have for you. And I heard someone say a long time ago that I think we sometimes fantasize about that, but you don't want to know the plans that he has for you. Because if you know how difficult things would be, you might want to abandon ship pretty early. But on the end of this story, you'll find your barley in the harvest like they found. And we know the story now because at this point in time, she doesn't know the story. She doesn't know the plan. And at this point in time, we don't know the plan, but we know the God that we serve. And if we can take lessons from her story and trust him, then although there are going to be difficulties, there's going to be challenges, there's going to be points and times where I don't feel like being called Naomi either, because my heart is broken. Uh, I don't know. I feel like I've been surrounded by this, and not me personally, but this dark space where young men are wrestling with like suicide all over the place here, it feels like. And it's not just young men, it just feel like there's a heaviness everywhere. Like a lot of people are just like dealing, it's like any little small thing can kind of set it off. And you see it being set off in over the most trivial things now. You can't even probably pull into a parking space now without thinking that somebody gonna pull out a gun and try to shoot you over it. Because it's just so difficult and stressful now. So now, even more than ever, we need to take these lessons from Naomi and Ruth and trust him and trust him because he does know the plan that he has for us. And it is to prosper us and to give us a hope in the future. So I believe that. So appreciate you allowing me to share that.
And I just wanted to say, Cedric, that perspective of verse 21, and I mean 20 and 21, like as I'm sitting here looking at it on the screen over here, and I'm just like, that's a really deep, like interesting perspective of those two verses and how um of Naomi taking the focus off of herself and and not wanting to be like in the limelight, not want all that celebration is going on. Y'all can keep that right now, that type of thing, and very understandable. So that's helpful to me. All right. Well, if there are no other last comments, we will um, go ahead and dismiss. All right. Is there anybody? Oh, okay. I saw it.
Yes, I can close in prayer. I found um, a couple of prayers that I want to share.
Oh,
Okay.
amen.
Okay. So the first one is a prayer of surrender to God. And so where you go, I will go. Lord, I want to follow your direction even when I don't know where you're leading me. Where you stay, I will stay. God, help me remain faithful and trust you in every season, not only when life is easy. Your people will be my people. Lord, connect me with your people and help me walk in fellowship with others who follow you. Your God will be my God. I choose you as my God. I place my trust, identity, and future in your hands. Lord, wherever you lead me, help me follow. When I don't understand the path, help me trust your presence. Let my heart stay close to you and let my life reflect that you are my God. Amen.
Amen.
Wow.
All right.
Beautiful.
That being said, everyone have a great night, a great rest of the week until we meet again, till the next appointed time.
Take care, everyone. Bless.